Welcome to Top Advisor Marketing, where you will learn how to become a prolific online influencer, attract more ideal clients, and grow your practice. Brought to you by Top Advisor Podcasting, a done-for-you podcasting solution built just for trusted advisors. And now, your co-hosts of Top Advisor Marketing, Kirk Lowe and Matt Halloran.
Hello and welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. I'm Matt Halloran, your host, joined today by Kirk Lowe, founder of Tactibrand. This is podcast number 3. Today we're going to talk about first impressions. Now, Kirk, I know that everybody says you only get one chance to make a first impression, but help me understand what you're talking about when you say, you really got to pay attention to this first impression.
Yeah. The truth is, in my opinion, the idea that you get one chance to make a first impression is complete hogwash. I was going to say another word, but
yeah, keep it clean, man. Keep it clean.
Keep it clean. Yeah. You keep telling me that. So, I think a series of impressions actually contribute to building a first impression. And I've read that, there's some people that believe that, impressions happen over time, and there's a collection of them. It's definitely how I feel as well. So I like to think that there's, many, many times. I mean, you always want to be making an impression, and that contributes to your impression, your believability, equity, if you want to call it, or your trust equity. How much do these people, like you, how professional they think you are, how smart they think. There's all these variables that are going on in their mind. Do they get your look, your feel, your culture, who you work with, what so many different things. So impressions happen on a lot of different levels. That's really important to know. And impressions are all a personal thing too. So that's why you always want to know who your audience is and understand them, so that you can impress them in ways that they actually perceive as good. But there are a lot of different opportunities, and I've got a pretty big list here of some really simple things. And everybody will have their own list, but we can kind of get you started with that.
That sounds awesome. All right, well, jump right in, man.
So, one of the first things is your website. This is an obvious one. People are going to go to your website. How are they going there? Was it through a search engine? Was it through a Facebook ad? Was it through an email that you sent? And you would argue that if you sent an email, that would be your impression, right? So, so what does your website look like? Is it friendly? Does it speak to them? Is it professional? Is it easy to go, and is it easy for your eye to know where to go? Is it easy to scroll? Does it work? Does it work on a mobile device or just on a desktop? There's so many things that make that impression. It's not just, do I have a great, big, beautiful picture? I see so many financial advisors these days working with website companies or freelance website designers, and they're so visually stimulated that they get sold on this idea of, I really need to set this great, big, beautiful picture of some grandparent fishing with their kid, and that's basically what your website is. And the truth is, you need to have depth. It's not just impression. Isn't just what something appears to be. It's actually more often now what it is, because people are really quick at discerning whether something is real or fake, and they can get there quick.
Well, I want to touch on that website thing too very quickly, and also email, and one of the other things that you have on your list. So I want to just do an overarching thing. One of the reasons why it's really important to bring an objective third person in, whether that's Kirk, whether that's myself, whether that's somebody else, is to find out what your eyes are drawn to. In fact, I was just on a website of an advisor that I'm consulting right now, and he said, Matt, what's the first thing that your eye is drawn to? And it was these scrolling quotes. And then right above the scrolling quote was this great call to action, right? And I was like, man, I went right to the middle of the page to the call to action. But it's the same thing when you walk into a person's office. When you walk in, when clients walk in or prospects walk into your physical space, you need to figure out what your eyes are drawn to. And I'm going to tell you a very, very quick story. I was in an office down in Georgia, and we were in their conference room. And I was doing an on-site consultation. I do these very in-depth practiced investigation sort of inspections. And so I was sitting there and I said, well, where do the clients sit? And they said, the clients usually sit here. And the first thing that I noticed was there was duct tape on the arms of the chairs. Okay. Black duct tape for black chairs, which was nice, but not really. And then I'm looking at this huge credenza that's right behind them, and they were all books on how to sell to people. And so I said, they're like, well, what do you think about our conference room? And I got up from the chair and I walked over and I started throwing books onto their table. And they're like, what do you do? And I said, what's the title of that book? And it said High Pressure Sales. And I was like, and they said, and this is what I hear all the time, and I'm sure you've heard this with websites and brands, Kirk, but, well, nobody's ever said anything to me about it. And I was like, well, of course they're not going to say anything to you about it. You're a high-pressure salesperson. So, try to figure out whether it's a written material, whether it's a brochure, a pamphlet, a business card, your personal space, your office, your conference room. Look at where your eyes are drawn immediately, because that's where everybody else's eyes are going to be drawn too. So sorry about interrupting, but you said that about the website, and that just triggered a bunch of stuff.
I mean, the office is such a huge one, and I think a lot of advisors, I mean, I'm not in as many offices as I used to be, but it's a huge problem for advisors. I can remember before I started my company, Tactic Brand, when I was working in the business, working with an advisor, and he always wanted to put reading literature out in the waiting room. And he did a couple things that were just mind-boggling to me. And the first one was he would have magazines there. Sometimes he would have mutual fund kind of stuff hanging around. I was like, well, that's bad. Mm-hmm. Second one is he would have books on financial stuff. And I was thinking, well, why do you have that? Like, have a book on maybe gardening or other things that interest them. Don't get their mind thinking about financial. That's what they do when they get in the office with you. The other thing he used to do is he used to think, to make people think that I'm important, I'm going to make them wait for 10 minutes in the waiting room before I meet. So he was always on purpose 10 minutes late for every meeting.
Yep, I've heard that too.
And I was like, oh, are you kidding me?
Here's my favorite.
Those as an impression, those are crazy. Go ahead.
So a financial planning firm. So you and I have a couple of joint clients, and the big thing about the people that you and I seem to gravitate to are people who look at the market in a long-term way, right? I've used the bike riding analogy before. If you've ever ridden a bike, if you look at the front tire, you're going to be overcorrecting and you're going to fall off your bike. But if you look a long time, down the road or down the trail, your ride is a lot smoother. And a lot of financial advisors use this analogy because they don't want to have to overcome market dip conversations and all of that sort of stuff. But when you walk into their waiting room, they have freaking CNBC on with a live ticker on the bottom talking about how the world is coming to an end, because that's all CNBC talks about. So, those are the sorts of things that, from a first impressions, those you might not be told that those are affecting your clients, but just like the mutual fund prospectus and books about finance, you're getting them in the wrong sort of. It's like, it's like going on a date and not being prepared, smelling bad, your hair's all jacked up, you have no idea what's going on there.
Let's do a show on receptions. I'm not kidding you. Dude, I have a whole bunch more stories to talk about.
I have so many pictures that I could share with you.
Let's do a show.
Okay.
I wanted to mention something right now. So we're in podcast number 3.
Yep.
And you're on at least analogy number 4.
Oh, come on.
And I've said it in other things that we've done, but I'm going to say it right now. You are the king of analogies, and everybody's got to count as they're going through.
Wait till we get some of these other sections, buddy, that we're going to today. All right. Okay. So you've talked about the website. You've even talked about email. We'll talk about the office. What else are possible first impressions? Let's get back on track, darn it.
I mean, when they're on your website, there's things that could be on there that create an impression too. Whether or not you've got any, like expert knowledge base, knowledge base. So whether you've got a paper, what the name of the paper is, if it's real super professional, or if it sounds like it's not that valuable, things like that can make a huge difference. How you do your call to actions. If your only call to action is call big on your page, call me for a no obligation, no cost meeting, and you haven't offered anything up to get them there, doesn't make the best impression, right? That's akin to your, having the sales book in that room, and that's you kind of see it and you're like, I'm probably not going to tell this person, but it would have been nice if they gave me some way to build some trust with them and or maybe proved why they think they're the expert or why they think they know me and my issues better than, somebody else.
Yep.
A handshake. Could be that simple. Could be when they come into your office room. I won't talk about the decorating or anything like that, but it could be just how your staff greets them. It could be, I won't get into that because we're going to do a whole podcast on that, but could be how your team answer the phone. Could be how easy it is to get to your team. Could be things like that. These are all first impressions. Could be your meeting process. So, somebody, you've made enough good impressions, great website, great story, got some good papers on there. Eventually, you invite them to a webinar. Eventually, they say, they come to a private client event or something like that where you invited some prospects. And then finally, they say, I'm going to meet with you. They come into your meeting, and in their mind, they're remembering that process that you had on your website that had this diagram. And then all of a sudden, they got in the meeting, and you start drawing pictures on some yellow paper, and you're all over the map because you're just doing some Sandler sales method, and they're like, this is a weird discovery. We're already in. It almost feels like we're already into how I'm going to buy life insurance all of a sudden or something. And so all of a sudden the meeting process is derailed. So, stuff like that is huge. The kinds of questions you ask are the same kinds of questions you're asking on your website. So you got to have that, that consistency. And we'll talk about some of the tips to making better first impressions. Your style, right? Are you, does your style meet their style to a degree, or do they respect the style that you're presenting? Sometimes advisors try to, have a window where you can see their fancy car up back, and some people are more about trying to look successful than they are trying to look authentic. What do your clients care about? Do they, some clients might actually care more about how successful you look because they think it portrays how successful they are. So you got to figure out your audience, you got to know them well. You got to work really hard at first impressions. Ads, that you run, how you post Facebook, how you post stuff on Facebook, how you post on your personal Facebook page. Maybe people just find you there. So how you are in your personal life may impact how you are in your professional life. And people look for that stuff, So I made this mistake the other day. I posted something in a hockey blog, and I hadn't realized that I had put my real name. I didn't use my real name as my avatar. And I'm not trying to, fake anybody out. But I made this joke that was in that group was probably okay, but I had mentions running. And I realized when mentions was looking for any time it finds my name out there. And I realized that this comment that I made on its own was out of context and it didn't look very nice. So I immediately went back and got rid of it. I'm just telling you that those kinds of things are part of your impression, and people can find stuff about you that you might not know is out there. So you always want to be aware of what you're doing and saying. What I said wasn't earth shattering, but it's still one of those things that you're always looking out for, making the right impression.
But it's important for you to keep that top of mind, and here's another. So this is the fifth analogy. So I'm driving down the road and I get cut off by this service truck for a local heating and air company. The guy's like waving his hand out the window and he's flipping me off and all this stuff. I'm thinking to myself, dude, seriously? Like, just because of that, the probability of me ever doing business with you is now zero. And so, you have to pay attention to that stuff. And when it comes to social, which millennials are going to have an issue with this later down the road because their whole life is on Instagram and Snapchat. But the overall idea, if you don't, it's the grandmother test. You and I have talked about this in previous podcasts. But if you don't want your grandmother to see it, then your clients shouldn't see it either. My grandmother told me there's certain things that you don't talk about in polite conversation: sex, religion, money, and politics. And for some reason, that's what most people talk about nowadays, but please keep that and stuff in mind. I've had advisor clients of mine who have lost huge clients because they posted something political, right? So you always making impressions. They might not be the first impression. And I think that's really where you're getting to here, Kirk, is you have to be making a consistent impression over time with websites, handshakes, elevator statements, which of course is ridiculous. Who actually ever sells themselves in an elevator anymore? But your team, your office, what happens when somebody walks in. But let's break down some more of the categories here, because you just kind of talked about, some of the first impression areas. But now if we're going to talk about consistency of impression, where do we really need to focus?
Yeah, so I'm going to break down the categories that you can kind of think about. And the first one is digital. So anything that you do digitally, whether it's social media, your website, email, all those things, you want to pay attention to all those. But if you categorize it, it may allow you to draft a list of the things that you want to be careful of or cognizant of, right? Second one is in the public eye or public media. So if you're getting interviewed, or if you're doing a PR type of event, or you're getting articles published, things like that, you want to make sure that, you proofread your article, that you're prepared, all those things, right?
Yep.
Just in the community in general. I mean, if you're a part of charitable organizations or associations, whether it's homeowners kind of thing or taxpayer kind of all those kinds of things, you always want to consider that you're always representing who you are as a person, and who you are a person is who you are as a professional. So you always want to be thinking about the things, how you're dressing, what people are expecting to see from you. It doesn't mean you need to always be, you're always on. You always need to be on. You can't just be yourself, but certainly just be aware that being yourself needs to be in line with who you are professionally, especially if you're out in front of people. I mean, it sounds like we're kind of giving some really, over motherly information
but
here.
It's so true. I'm fine. I'll be the mother.
I just see this stuff happening all the time.
I do too. And here's the deal. And this happens in an office that I was working with in Ohio. And we had to pull aside this gentleman who was a producer in their office because he would go out and he would get absolutely plastered. He was terrifically inappropriate, especially when it came to women and all of this sort of stuff. And the guy was like, dude, I just want to be able to be myself. And I said to him, well, you know what? You need to really think about who you are, because if who you are is offending people and potentially could hurt you from a business perspective, maybe you need to figure that out a little bit more. And I agree. People say, Matt, I really need a break from work. Well, if you really need a break from doing your job, then you might want to reconsider what you're doing for a living. But the other piece of it is just don't do it socially. Right? If you're a member of the Ku Klux Klan, wear the hood, right? Don't be walking around with your face all hanging out and wonder why people are pissed off that they don't like you being in the Klan. I know that's an American thing, but that's the sort of stuff that I think is really important for people to keep top of mind.
You're on a roll today, brother.
Hey, dude. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know. I might have had too much coffee, but keep going.
Too much coffee. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's kind of over motherly to me when we're talking about it, but we both have lots of stories that we could tell about things that just don't seem right. And I've seen the drinking one before at conferences. I find that's a big one. Just people going a little bit nutty. I've seen some pretty inappropriate things going on too. But anyhow, I think a lot of people, hopefully, that are listening to us, have got a lot of the stuff figured out. So maybe we can
I sure hope so. And I also, when it really comes to your office and your team and your operations and your process and your systems and what your intake paperwork looks like, these are all, again, they're consistent impressions here, right? So, with your team, and here's one of the favorite things I saw an office do. So a new prospect would come in, right? And the first thing that would happen is everybody knew that this new prospect was coming in. I was actually a couple, and everybody in the office walked over, greeted them, saying their name, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, thank you very much for coming in. My name is Matt. I'm the one who does the operations, which we'll explain a little bit more later on if you decide to become a member of our family. But we just wanted to say thank you for coming in today. And it was like this magnificent parade of, and there's only 2 or 3 people in the office, but when they actually got to the advisor, the first thing that they said was, wow, your team is really friendly. And bam, that was part of his brand, right? That was part of the impression that he wanted to make. Those are those little things. I've walked into offices too, Kirk, where they have a little iPad that says, welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. So that the first thing that I see when I walk in is a nice, warm welcome message. These are consistent things that are very simple to execute if you just systematize them and make sure that they're there. But so we've really beat people up about, not going out and being stupid. But let's start talking about what are we missing here?
So we've talked about Office. I mean, there's tons of opportunities there. We're going to do a whole show on that. I don't know when it'll be, but just keep checking back. We'll get to it. Team. So what opportunities are within your team to make them better? So how friendly they are, how good at communicating they are, how often they communicate with people, what they say when they communicate. Do they? This is a big one. I get emails from financial advisors that all the time are so cryptic. because they're so busy. They don't take the time to explain themselves well. And I suspect that happens with clients from time to time too. I know it's different. I'm not a client, but how you communicate with some people is likely how you communicate with others. And I find most of the time I try it when I'm emailing people, I take some extra time to try to simplify it as much as possible. And I think, there's all kinds of neat opportunities like that. So think about in your operations or, your team, what opportunities, how often are you making impressions, and what can you do to control the impression? I think if people kind of write these categories, and I'll go over the 6 again, you can find a lot of little things, and you can do you can make like a checklist, bring your team in and say, are we being as good as we can be in these areas at making the impressions that we need to? And so I'll go over the 6. I'm going to give you this little formula. So the first one is digital, then media or publicity, then just you and the community, your office, your team, and then operations/process. So you can make those 1, or you can make it 2. It's up to you. So those are the areas.
Okay.
I want to give you this. I called it a formula. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it, but think about when you're thinking about impressions. I always feel like it's like putting money in a jar. You'll have a better analogy, I'm sure, for me, Matt. But
give me a minute.
Yeah. You're building what I call trust equity. Every time you make a good impression, you put a coin in this jar. And what you always want to be doing is you want that to be overflowing in your business, because that is when you become truly referable. That's when people love talking about, is when your trust equity is overflowing. So when you get there, that's great. But you got to remember this: when you make a mistake, when you build impressions, usually one token at a time, if you will. But when you make a mistake, depending on what it is, sometimes that can unload that trust equity really quick. Great advisors build great trust equity, and they continue to do that over and over and over again. And think about your practice like that and how you build impressions.
Absolutely. So you've got some tips here. So let's break down these tips on really looking at those 6 categories, potentially 7, and how you can make it so that there are going to be a consistent impression.
Yeah. So consistency is one of the most important things. However professional you are in one area, if your expectations are to be highly professional on your website, and when they come into your reception, but then they get back to your office, and it's not, you got to keep the consistency everywhere. Whatever level of professionalism and whatever you think your clients expect from you, you need to have that standard consistently implemented across everything you do. So look at those categories, write a bunch of lists or opportunities where you make impressions. Could be a report cover, could be the way somebody greets you, could be what your staff wears in the office, could be what you wear in the office, could be how many plants, or there's just so many things that could happen. How you present yourself in public. Do you have some do you do some odd things with your hands when you're talking? Digitally, is your logo look good? Do you use the same color thing, or do you use different color in email because it's a different person than who's doing your newsletter, which is different than the person who's doing social media? You know what I mean? So you got to keep this consistency throughout everything you do, and meet that at least the minimal level of professionalism that you set for your company, that your clients expect from you. Second one is your message. You can't change your message up all the time. You got to have a brand, and that brand, and might have a tagline or some key phrases with it, things that you say all the time. You can change the key phrases, but the underlying message about who you are has to be in everything that you do. So you always want to be focused on your brand message, and you want that to be as consistent as you can through everything you do. Because as soon as you start to veer from that, then it's like, what? I had this client who came to me and said, look, I get a lot of PR, but the people that call in for PR, they just want to talk about stocks and bonds, and that's kind of what I get. I do a bunch of radio and TV spots for that kind of stuff. And he said, but I'm really about financial planning and doing all this really, really significant financial plans and goals, and helping people spend more time doing things they love. I just love doing that. And I said, well, why are you doing this show? Why are you doing this kind of publicity? Or why are you talking about these things? And he said, well, that's what they love me talking about. I said, but So, but why would you have one message and then go give a completely different message out in the media? So that doesn't even make any sense. As it turned out, after a couple months of working, he couldn't get over the fact that I was holding him accountable, and we stopped working together, which I'm proud of, because I'm not going to change and do less good job for somebody just because they got their head in the sand.
Sure.
But, if he decided that the message and how he wanted to run his business, if he could translate that message, which wouldn't have been that difficult, into the media, he might have taken a bit of a hit, because part of his personality was always, how he blasted what was going on in the economy and the decisions people were making. But he could have found a way to make those two work, but he couldn't. And I suspect he's having the same struggles that he's had before, which is all the marketing he does brings him exactly the kind of people he doesn't enjoy working with or doesn't want to work with. And so you got to have that message across all, and that's what one of the things that message does. It makes sure that you're always attracting the right people for the right reasons. You got to have the same colors, fonts, graphics everywhere. So, if your color is teal blue and it's the code is, 25437, use that exact color everywhere you go, whether it's in your hat or on your mug, or it's your logo or your email, a background in your email, or it's the color you decided to paint your car in. Whatever it is, make sure it's all the same color. Make sure it's all the same fonts. There's something that anybody who's designing your logo, you should ask for, is a graphics standards manual.
Absolutely.
That's a really, really important document. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how big of an advisor you are, it's huge.
I got introduced to that at my old company where we had the marketing standards, the brand standard manual. And it was brought to me like, Matt, when you walk into Target, how do you know you're in Target? And it's not just because obviously, I walked into Target. It's because the color scheme is the same. The graphics are the same. All of the font are the exact same kind of fonts. And, people think that they're being creative by mixing things up, but it actually confuses your brand, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. You don't just want to have, Target, one of the things that they have going on for them is they do have one color, but you don't have to be, bland, that's for sure, right? You can be a little more exciting than that. But you certainly want to make sure that you have, stick to all those things. Another thing that you can do is culture. So making sure that, the personality of your staff, the personality of your blog posts, the personality of your podcasts, all those things, they all feel the same. If the way you treat your staff is way different than you are when you're doing a podcast, people come in and think, geez, that's odd. Like, he seems like such a friendly guy, and we come into the office and he's kind of like militant with his staff. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things, that kind of consistency with culture is huge. Style's a big one. If you've got people in your office who, you always want to encourage people to be themselves and have personality, and have their own style. But if people's style is way off of yours, and that might send a mixed message too. Value systems. If you have people that work for you, you want to make sure that they all kind of value similar things. Because I don't know if that's really the best point.
I think it's very important. I really, really do. It's a difficult conversation to have that really needs to be done during the hiring process. But I've worked in offices where there is a very similar value structure. And here's where this is important to me as a consultant and a coach is when things get rough. If we've got a good culture in the office and we have the same values, then when I need everybody as the employer to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and maybe put in a little extra time, they know that they're all on the right seat, on the right bus, moving in the right direction. So that's not just a first impression thing, but that's how it can play out with client interaction.
Yeah. So, what I'm trying not to do is to say your businesses have to be so streamlined and aligned that it looks a little too perfect, if that makes sense. Because I think that might sound quite contradictory, because I'm telling you everything needs to be aligned. What I'm saying is don't do it to the extent that it makes you completely boring, if that makes sense.
I absolutely agree.
Or sterile, whatever, like too sterile of an environment. Like you want it to be, you want to have some personality and some life, just due to the extent that you can work within that framework, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You also want to try to have similar outcomes for everybody. So if you're taking everybody through the same process, you want them to be able to achieve the same outcomes. So that helps you. It helps you stick to processes when you're trying to get to the same outcome. And I think processes drive brand consistency and impressions. So, think about if you have a certain outcome you want to get somebody to sue. A lot of times going through a process to get there makes a lot of sense. And having processes and procedures all lined up for your people allow everybody to get the same, a lot of your clients to experience the same outcomes. And that can be huge.
I think and again, when you get back to talking about what your brand message is, one of the pieces that I bring, and I think I learned this from you, is I want to know how, when they get done with whatever our process is, which is again a subcategory of your brand, how should they feel? What should that experience be like? And if your whole team understands that that's how people are supposed to feel, then again, everybody's moving in the same direction. And that's what I think first impressions and overall impressions are supposed to do for you and your firm, is to make everybody feel like when they show up, I'll use a sports analogy, right? Everybody who's on the team is wearing a jersey or wearing the team colors, and they're a professional team. Why don't we do the same thing at our workspace? We're professionals. There's a code that we're supposed to be behaving in a specific manner. And you're right, it shouldn't be sterile, but it should definitely be communicated. Because then people function as a team. It's crazy. I had an office that moved from suits to golf shirts because their clients were kind of like, nobody dresses up in this community. Why are you all suited up in a $5,000 suit? So they got these nice shirts that had their logo on it. And he said, when people put that shirt on, it's like they're putting on their uniform. And when they come into work, they know it's like this weird different mindset. And it wasn't that, they were little clones or drones walking around. It was people were suited up, they were ready for game time, and they were ready to play. But I have a big question for you, because my grandmother told me, Matt, you only have one chance to make a first impression. But in the digital world today, that's not true anymore, because you don't know when people are going to actually accept that impression. So give me some information on that, Kirk. How many impressions does it take for people to even think that they have an impression of you now?
I don't think that was ever right. I'm going to say that your grandma was wrong.
Oh, dude, seriously, man?
Do not tell her that.
She's rolling over in her grave right now.
Yeah.
That's all right. She was wrong about a lot of stuff, but that's all right. Okay,
yeah.
So if that wasn't right...
I have a lot of respect for grandmas.
So what is right, man? So help me with that.
I mean, it takes a lot of impressions. I think you told me the stat the other day, so why don't you share it? So the stat for how many times it takes to make an impression. Well, I don't know if that was the stat or if it was how many times you have to.
Right. That's kind of an extrapolation of the steps. So basically what it is before in social media specifically, it would take somebody 7 times to see a message before they decided to take action on that. And now that's moved up to 10. Right. So you have to get your message in front of people 10 times before they will consider taking action on it.
So we're extrapolating quite a bit from the stat, but I don't think it's far-reaching for us to do that, because how long it takes you to see something to actually develop an opinion about whether or not you want to, it happens over many times. And it's the same thing with impression. You don't make a complete impression the first time. I mean, if it's really strong or really bad, it may weigh more heavily than subsequent impressions that you have of somebody. So first one is obviously important, and maybe it's more important than the second, third, and fourth because of how big or good or how bad it is. But I think it's really important to know that every time somebody sees you or experiences you, you're making an impression that goes either into the equity or takes away from your equity. Your trust equity. Well, and you have to think about it like that.
So let's talk more about trust here, because that's the ultimate goal. I mean, we're in an industry that sells trust, and so how do you wrap this whole up into a nice bow with that?
Yeah. Well, relationships and marketing So everything you do with your clients before they become clients and when they are clients and even after they're clients, which probably doesn't matter as much, but it's all about trust. And everything you do or don't do is either building or taking away how much trust they have in you, whether it's your expertise or whether it's how professional or whether they can trust you're ever going to call them back, or whether they trust that you're going to help them get the outcomes they want, or whether they trust you're going to take care of their friends if they refer them. There's just so many things that go into this trust jar, and you have to be aware at every turn, every corner, whether you're contributing, whether you're building it, or whether you're taking away from it. And I think if you think about most things in your practice like that, it'll give you some really nice perspective to do really good things in a lot of different areas to be perceived as better and to actually be better. So I think that kind of sums it up well.
Fantastic. So today's podcast, number 3, we talked about first impressions and all of the different things that you need to take into consideration when you are thinking about what sort of persona you want to put out, not just for you, but also your firm and what kind of client experience you have. So, Kirk, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep. And I'm Matt Haller, and this was Top Advisor Marketing Episode 3.